give the Israelites, the Jewish nation, forgiveness of the sins that they had committed that year. This day is still like an honored Jewish holiday, and it was on October the 12th, but the components of it are pretty expansive, so we haven't been able to just go through it in one time. And in fact, last time, mostly what we talked about was just the mercy seat, just the covering over the ark and what it was and what it meant. And we're going to go into a little bit more now about how the mercy seat was involved in the sacrifice. And something that I mentioned last time was that the mercy seat was surrounded by a crown. This crown prevented the lid from sliding off, but it's a symbol of authority, it's a symbol of holiness, it's a symbol of royalty, and all of those secure the mercy seat where it is. And here, this is the last slide that we ended up on last Sunday. And what we said here was that mercy seat is mentioned in the New Testament, and it's used as the word propitiation. And that's not a word that we're readily familiar with, but this word is what is being used to translate what mercy seat was in the Old Testament. And further, it's being used to describe Jesus in Romans, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood. So by believing in Jesus, his blood is what covers the mercy seat. So where I want to start today is, I think it's important that we go through the verses in Leviticus that lays out the specifics on what is happening during the Day of Atonement. I think that we can summarize these and say there were sacrifices, there was blood spilled, but I think it's good we have time to go into exactly what's going to happen. And then through those, we're going to pick out some of the highlights, some of the top aspects, the top symbols that are within this ceremony. So what I mentioned before was the specifics of the Day of Atonement is laid forth in Leviticus 16. And Leviticus 16 is in the center of the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible. And in the center of Leviticus chapter 16 is in the very middle, and as such, it's into the center of the holiest of holies, into the innermost place. So it is arranged in such a way as to indicate the importance of it by even where it's located within the Bible. So we'll start in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 6, and then we're going to read through here. And I'll warn you, I've got a few slides of reading, and all of this kind of may not make sense initially, but we're going to break it down and work through it so we can understand exactly what's happening. Let me get a drink of water before we start reading. All right, this is what God is commanding Moses happen in order for the Day of Atonement, for Yom Kippur. This is what God is telling Moses that he wants to happen. These are the steps in which to honor this day. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the desert as a scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household, and he is to slaughter the bull for his own sin offering. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and take them before the curtain. He is to put the incense on fire before the Lord, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the ark cover above the testimony, so that he will not die. He is to take some of the bull's blood, and with his finger sprinkle it on the front of the ark cover. Then he shall sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the ark cover. He shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people, and take its blood behind the curtain, and do with it as he did with the bull's blood. He shall sprinkle it on the ark cover and in front of it. In this way he will make atonement for the most holy place, because of the uncleanliness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in the midst of their unclean. No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he comes out, having made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole community of Israel. And this is our last slide here of the Leviticus 16. When Aaron has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. He is to lay hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. He shall send the goat away into the desert in the care of a man appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a solitary place, and the man shall release it in the desert. So it's a lot of protocol, it's a lot of specifics on how God is wanting the Day of Atonement to take place. And I've got a summary here of all those things that we just read. We have first a ram that's sacrificed as a burnt offering. So this ram, its blood is not used. It's placed over the burning altar that we talked about last time. And it's presented as a burnt offering. The smoke of that would rise up and please the Lord. Aaron must sacrifice in order for him to enter in. He has to be absolved of his own sins in order for him to present the sins of the people. So Aaron must sacrifice a bull for himself in order to be accepted. He then takes 2 goats and he casts lots to decide which one is which. One is for the Lord, and this is the one that is slain. And then the other one is for a word used in the Old Testament, Azazel, and this is otherwise known as the scapegoat, the one that is released into the wilderness. And that symbolizes the carrying away of the sin. So further here, we have a picture of each one of the animals that's being involved in the sacrifice. We have the bull that's sacrificed. This is for the high priest to cover his sins. We have the ram that is placed on the burning altar. And then we have the 2 goats that are sacrificed. One for the Lord, whose lot, 2 goats, and if the lot falls on the one for the Lord, then this is the one that's sacrificed, and its blood is applied to the ark cover, to the mercy seat. And if the lot falls to the scapegoat, then this goat, the priest would put his hands upon it, confess the sins of the people, and release it out. So it's interesting, and I think this is true, that this is the only example of a sacrifice it's not killed, it's not slain. It's a sacrifice that's sent away and is living. And this is, of course, y'all can imagine, symbolic of Jesus. And each one of these are as well, too. So I want to start out and first look at the scapegoat. If we look online on the dictionary and we look for the term scapegoat, this is what we get: a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others, especially for reasons of expediency. So someone who is blamed for something who doesn't carry the blame, who doesn't truly carry the blame, you're placing the blame on someone else. And in psychology, this is a defense mechanism where blame is projected onto someone else in order to avoid dealing with the negative emotions. So they don't want to say, I'm guilty, I have a part in this. It's much easier to blame someone else for that. So they project their blame onto the scapegoat, a person that symbolizes here the scapegoat. And the group does not want to acknowledge the blame and accusation, so it's placed upon this other person. And in doing so, when this blame is projected onto this person, I have here, it's instantly transferred to the scapegoat, and the group's problems are absolved. And we know that, no, they're not actually absolved. How can you just blame someone else? But mentally, when we place blame of our own wrongdoings, or in, a social setting, when we have someone who is an outcast, and it's easy to depict them as the enemy or someone that we don't like, when we're able to project that emotion onto someone else, then we don't have to deal with it ourselves. It's placed on someone else. That's their problem. They're weird. They've created these issues, within the group. So when they're able to give a name and to place it on someone else, then it's kind of like you wash your hands of it because it's their fault. It's their problem. So when we do that, and we do that now, we do that in modern times, we create scapegoats. When we create someone who is a villain, when we're blaming someone else for problems and for situations that they're involved in that they're not responsible for, when we create a villain, what we're doing is, I have here, we're inadvertently creating a hero. Because if we can place the blame on someone else and blame that person for the wrongdoings, for the misfortunes of the group, then we are elevating ourselves. We found the problem. Here is the problem. It's all over here. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with us. So there is a sense of elevation in being able to recognize and point out where these problems can be pushed to. And I have a good quote here. Sometimes it is the villain or villains who are in need of an even greater villain. And I want us to think about that. When we are guilty, and when it's so hard for us to take responsibility for our own faults and our own actions in a situation, we need to create somebody that's even worse than us. And we need to place all of our blame and all of these things that should be directed toward us on somebody else. So in the same way, initially when I first read about all these sacrifices, I thought, the scapegoat gets out easily. He gets out alive. Like, look at the scapegoat. If you were an animal of these, which one would you rather be? The one that gets out alive. But in the scapegoat, there is blame, there is accusation. And Daryl, you used to have goats, right? I went through a phase like one would do where I was like, I'd love to have a bunch of goats. We have property up there, and I thought, we could have those little fainting goats, and the girls would love them. And I started looking into, well, how bad would this be? Like, how much time would be involved in if we got some goats? And apparently a lot. And then you have to worry about them getting sick and worming them and doing all this stuff. And I was like, I don't have time for all that. But one of the things that I learned in looking at goats was that I thought we could just maybe get one to start out with. But goats are very social creatures. Is that right, Daryl? You can't just have one goat. You got to have like a bunch of goats because they are together. They're just a herd. It's like having like one sheep or something. You know, you don't just have one of those. And well, you gotta have several. So in this scapegoat, on the Day of Atonement, the lot that has fallen to the scapegoat, it is taking the blame of everybody, and it's being forced out into a solitary place by itself when it is meant to be something that is shared, to be social, to be among the other people. So while we regard this as, you know, the scapegoat got away with his life, but he carried with it the blame and the faults of the entire people that were placed upon it wrongly. And there is a sense of dehumanization in the scapegoat. Once you focus all this negative energy and blame on this person, they are less than a person because they hold the faults that everybody has been guilty of, that they have then placed it upon the scapegoat's head. And now this is the reason, this is all the problems that are being placed upon them. And it's less of a person because of how guilty of all of the sin that it's now taken on. It happens in families, and this is like, you know, when I was looking this up, this is, like I said, a psychological term. It's a defense mechanism that we do. We want to protect ourselves and say that we're in the right. You know, we're not doing wrong. It's this person's fault. And it's typically someone who is outside of the group, who's a little bit different than everybody else. And it's easy for us to project and to blame this person because they're not in the inner circle. And there's also much larger examples of this. I have here in the Holocaust, where blame was placed on the Jewish people for the faults of that nation. And they were certainly dehumanized, and they were blamed for wrongdoings that they weren't responsible for. But because they were an outcast group, different from the social norm, it was easy for the German people to say, it's their fault. It was easy for them to transfer blame because of their position. And when they did, you know, they just performed awful experimental surgeries and experiments on them because they were not viewed as an equal. They were viewed as someone less. And also in the Salem witch trials, you know, that's something around Halloween that everyone kind of gets a piqued interest toward. And, you know, me and the girls have watched several documentaries on that, and I just find that so amazing. How did they convince, how was there this concerted effort by, you know, these children initially, that these women, you know, were possessed by the devil? But once they saw these women, and they would target them as, you know, women who were maybe unmarried or who weren't in the inner circle of the community at that time, and it was easy to say, yeah, you know, look at them, they do this, or it's odd that they have this mole, or whatever it was that they identified about them, which could be anything, you know. It could be anything that they did that put them outside of the norms of society, and then they could be blamed. And then it was their burden to prove that it wasn't true. And a lot of them couldn't. And I included a stupid example here too, maybe mainly for John. Who's the current coach of Florida? Once a team starts losing, you know, repetitively, whose fault is it that the team is not winning? It's the coach's fault. And everyone places blame on them. And I think if we could just get a new coach, we would be fine. So a scapegoat is something in modern society that we can all identify with, and it's not necessarily somebody that gets off easily. They have to live with the blame that was placed upon them. the fact that it wasn't true is irrelevant. They were blamed for that, and they were outcast. And I think that we've all recognized examples, just with me speaking through this, because I know I have, of people, maybe personally, but it's also easier to see other people's situations and to think about, the world and the Holocaust, how those examples provide for us modern day examples of a scapegoat. I say it's harder for us to have that perspective because I don't think we realize when we're doing that ourselves. It's much easier to see someone else's situation and point out how they're wrongfully blaming someone else. But if we're the ones doing it, it's much difficult for us to identify that because we are the person behind our eyes and we don't have perception on the wrongs that even we're committing. So we can all, though, think of examples of this, but I think that the main example that we can all relate to and we're all beginning to see is that Jesus was the scapegoat. Jesus was not only the physical sacrifice of the Day of Atonement, but he also he fulfilled all of the sacrifices. And I don't want to say especially, but in particular the scapegoat. In Hebrews chapter 13, verses 12 and 13, it says, "Therefore also Jesus, that he might sanctify Therefore also Jesus, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. Let us therefore go forth unto him outside the camp, bearing his reproach." And so the scapegoat was the animal that they led away out into the wilderness, away from the people, to carry away, to physically represent the carrying away of sins. But this verse in Hebrews here is talking about where Jesus was sacrificed, where he was placed on a cross. And this was in Golgotha, which was outside of the city, which was a sign of just lowliness, that they weren't even enough to be sacrificed, to be held within the city. He was sacrificed outside the camp. And it's saying, therefore, let us therefore go forth unto him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. So the Bible is asking us to go after the scapegoat, to go after what we have blamed, what we have placed the blame on, and for us to be similar to the scapegoat in taking on the blame and reproach. If it was not bad enough that God would take that away from him, if his own son was forced to bear reproach, how much more so are we who are expected to walk in his steps? And I think that this goes in contradiction to the prosperity message that is being shared so much. And I think that, we can, I'm thinking of a popular minister that I would listen to because, some days you just get down and you just want to hear a word of encouragement. And I knew if I would listen to this minister on any given day, that's what I was going to get. So I would purposely play that. But honestly, it was the same message. Anytime that I reached out for that, I was just down. It's like, I just need to hear a pick-me-up word. So I would turn it on and I would hear the same word. Because we are children of God. We have a right to the riches of God. We have a Father who owns the cattle of 1,000 hills. We can tap in to the prosperity, into the love and the goodness, and all of these things can be added onto us. But what's happening here is that Jesus was sacrificed and blamed and made to be less of a human. And we expect just the goodness. And when it comes to the difficult times, it's like we feel like we shouldn't have to bear that. But God doesn't call us into a life of easiness and things are going to be, just so great. And I'm going to align things out for you just to make it so good. But he refines us by fire. And going through fire is not something pleasant. And going through trials is not something enjoyable. And he's not doing it. And what we don't understand is that he's not doing it to punish us because he thinks that we're bad, but it is to take off those bad parts of us. Because I know that it is through times that have been difficult for me, those are the times that I pray and reach out to God. When things are going good and, when the sun is shining and things are, looking great, I'm like, oh, let's go for a walk. We need to plan a vacation. Let's do all these fun things, I need to go to Marshall's. I'm just living in just this cloud of distraction. But when things come to us, health scares, financial concerns, attacks, who do we look to? We immediately, all those other things that I just mentioned, immediately, they mean nothing. And we care for our core, for our soul, that we then feel rise up inside of us and reach out to God. And we realize in those times what's most important. So I got off on a tangent there. Sorry. I just think that people who come into Christianity, there is peace and there is rescue, but you have to be rescued from something and you have to need peace from something. And if you don't experience those things, then how can you attain what the Lord has for you? So, after that tangent, the other two things that I wanted to talk about Yom Kippur, we've talked about the mercy seat. We have touched on the sacrifices. But I want to talk about two other entities here. One is the veil, and the other is going through the sacrifices. So the veil was in the tabernacle or in the temple, and this is what separates the sanctuary into the innermost part, into the holiest of holies. So the veil provides the separation. Not anybody could go back in to this place. And it was the veil that delineated that from the outside to the inside. And then finally, after we get through the temple veil, we're going to talk about the sacrifices, what you have to bring once you get past there. After you get past there, it's with a purpose to bring the sacrifices. So the temple veil, as I said, is the entrance to the holiest of holies. And here is where the Lord has commanded Moses what it's going to look like. You are to make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. Make it with embroidery worked in craft by a skilled artisan. Hang it with gold hooks on 4 acacia wood posts overlaid with gold and standing in 4 silver sockets. Bring the ark for the testimony inside the curtain. The curtain will be the divider for you between the holy place and the most holy place. So just reading that description, this is not a plain linen curtain, a plain white curtain. This is a beautifully made and crafted veil that is going to hang down and separate. So it was a single veil, and this is like anecdotal. It's not necessarily biblical, but it was held that in Solomon's temple that the veil was a hand's width thick, this thick. So they had sewn it to be substantial. And I can so limited, but I have done, things with fabric, and we know that there's different types of fabric. There is linen fabric, which is thin and breathable. And when we think of linen sashes and tunics, that was the material that those things were made out of. But then we think about tapestry. And tapestry is a woven, interwoven fabric that typically will have some sort of pattern or depict something on it. And so we have now a veil that is very thick. It's very thick. And what I thought of when they would go into the holiest of holies, and when I thought about the temple veil in my mind before I read and kind of got deeper into this, how I envision a curtain is how I envision the curtains in our house. They're panels. And so you think of a curtain and you have two panels. And so if you're going to open the curtains of your windows, you will take it in the middle and you'll spread it apart and separate those two panels. But the veil to the entrance of the holiest of holies, there was no separation. It was a single veil that went all the way across. So this is good. So listen to this part. So when the priest was wanting to get into the holiest of holies through the veil, he couldn't open up the side and walk through, but he had to press in to this thick veil to go forward. He had to press in. So it wasn't something easy and it wasn't something open and presented to him, but he had to press in through the thick veil, to press in, as I was mentioning earlier, and probably the reason that it even come up because we think that we should be able, that things will be opened up for us and that we can go in easily and walk in forth because, God has given us that authority. But the veil here, it's asking us, if you want to get inside, you have to want to get inside. You have to be ready to push in, to go forward. You can't stop. It's not opened up easily, but you have to have that intention within your heart to press in, to get in through the veil. So you must press in to get to the presence of God. And that is not going to be something easy. It's not going to be something easy. Because I think of when I first got saved, and you have this elation and you just have, the love of God that's just poured out on you, and you've never felt that before in your whole life, and you're like, all these things that I've been searching for the meaning of life and how I feel empty in this way and empty in that way, all those things are filled up, when you first get saved. And today too, but you feel that when you first get saved and you accept salvation. But then it's like, you got do a lot to be a Christian. How you were in these ways before, you can't do that anymore. And then it's like, did you really get saved? There's all these questions, and it's like, at that time, I was a teenager, and it was like, your friends, they're not going to want to hang out with you anymore because you're going to be not fun. And so it's all of these pressures that come into you, and as you age, and certainly if you accept the Lord at a later age, those things are not, it's not what's on your mind, but it's, am I good enough? Can I really uphold the name of being a Christian? Can I continue to walk in this? I made this mistake. And so, the devil is crafty, and he will try and convince you and to take away parts of your salvation so that you would turn around. You just feel like it's a road you can't travel. It's too narrow. It's too isolated, and you can't do it. So when you accept salvation and in your walk, those things are going to be placed upon you. And you have to be willing, and you have to be, I don't even know if it's willing, you have to continue to pray, to have that strength from God to continue pressing in. Because when you get inside into the holiest of holies, then there is a separation. these things that are on the outside that are worrying you are gone. And the devil doesn't want to get you, he doesn't want you to be in that place. You're in a place where he can no longer access you. So I pray, and I pray from me that we always have, that we never lose that desire, that ability to continue to press in. I heard a minister, and I think I've mentioned him before here, Jack Graham. He said that, being a Christian is like riding a bike. If you stop pedaling, if you stop moving, then you're going to fall off. You always have to be in motion. And sometimes, this is stupid too, but I was showing John this video on Instagram, and it was a football, like a defensive lineman, huge guy. And he's going up against a sumo wrestler. And just size-wise, you're like, that guy's going to take that guy. So, they call it, and he breaks into him, and it would be like me running into John. Like, the sumo wrestler just absorbed all that impact. And he held him. He held him. And that guy, he's like, John said he's digging in. His feet were going, and he was trying to push. So the sumo wrestler, he didn't push him over. He didn't push him down, but he was pressing. He wasn't moving, but he was active. And I think sometimes that's where we have to be in our life, that we're not seeing these breakthroughs that we, this TV minister promised that we were going to see. We're waiting for this breakthrough in this specific moment that we've envisioned. But we have to be steady, and we have to be resisting, and we have to still be pressing, even though we're not gaining ground in that. We still have to put up that opposition. And this is the last slide. I think that we'll get through the last point. But the most beautiful point. And we have this veil, this finely crafted veil. It can't be separated. In order to get through, you have to push through. But what in all three Gospels that were recorded did Jesus do to this veil? He ripped it. He rent the veil in two. Let's read about that in each of these three Gospels here. Jesus cried out. He's being crucified. This is his last breath. Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The veil was not, if it was ripped by human hands, if we were tired of this veil and we were going to go in, where would we do? If we had a knife, we would start in the middle at our head. If we were at the bottom and short like me, we would start at the bottom and rip it up. But Jesus, when he was crucified, it was ripped from the top to the bottom, from the heavenly, from somewhere where we couldn't obtain, from this high place, and it was ripped to the bottom. In Mark, it says, and the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw that he died in this way, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. This centurion who watched multiple deaths, they had many public crucifixions, and Jesus died in such a way, after him saying hundreds, if not thousands, who knew? This one was different, because the earth shook, and inside the temple the veil was rent. And he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. And in Luke, it was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the entire land until the 9th hour, because the sun stopped shining, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit. So in each of the three Gospels, we read about the veil being torn. We see that the veil was a symbolism into the innermost, And for us to get into the innermost, even though that Jesus has rent the veil, it's now we have access into that innermost. But symbolically, in order for us to get there, that requires us to be active. That requires us to press in, to reach through this. And Jesus has torn this. We now have access and ability to get to this place through him if we pray and believe. So I want to end it up there. I think that's a good time to stop. I'm just going to pray for the end of this and into our next service. Lord, we thank you for the word that was given today. Thank you so much for speaking this into my heart. I pray, Lord, that the things that I've said, that people were able